Hey guys, welcome to Nathan's Car Care. I'm Nathan, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to install the Abrams LED grill lights that we reviewed in the previous video. If you haven't seen the review yet, you can check it out right here. And once you've done that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so before we begin, let's do a quick overview of what we're going to need. Since I'm going to be installing them on a bracket, I have this aluminum bar stock that I'm going to use to make the bracket. If you're installing on the body of the vehicle, this will be unnecessary. I've got flex tubing to keep the wires nice and neat and to protect them from the heat of the radiator. Have various zip ties for cable management. We have heat shrink tubing so that once we solder the joints, we can make them weather tight. We have electrical tape. We have the lights themselves. We have paint. Again, this is because I'm building a bracket. If you're not building a bracket, you won't need that. I also went ahead and picked up this wire here. I got this one from superbrightleds.com. It's 4 wires in one sheath, and it's 22 gauge to match what's on the lights. But this here, it makes it a whole lot easier to run the wires. You can run individual 22 gauge wires, but this here will make the process a whole lot easier and a whole lot neater. I'll go ahead and leave a link to it down in the description to where you can get this from. It's definitely worth it. And now here are the tools that I used. So we have an angle grinder. You could also use a hacksaw. I'm going to be using that to cut the aluminum for the bracket. We have a heat gun to shrink the heat sink tubing. A regular lighter would work just as well. We have a socket set. We have a rivet gun and rivets, again for the bracket. We have a Phillips screwdriver. We have various pliers. We have a soldering iron, solder, and this little device here. This is referred to as helping hands. What it will do is it'll hold the wires for you. This makes soldering a lot easier. We have a tape measure, a drill, and drill bits. Now, of course, a project like this, especially for the first time you do it, will take some time. So make sure you have several hours to be able to do it. It's better to go slower and make sure it's done right than to rush it and accidentally do something wrong. And because this does take several hours to do, also make sure that you have a lovely beverage on hand. It will come in handy. Alright, so this is the first bracket that I built for the lights for my review video. I really like it. It holds the lights out away from the radiator, and it only needed one mounting bolt. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to copy this, except we're going to, since we're adding 2 more, we're going to basically make an X pattern design. We're going to move these up a little bit, and then the other ones will be just down here. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is get our light out. Have our screws in the bottom, then we have our gasket right there. Alright, so to mount these, what we're going to do is we're going to separate the light. We have the lens separate. And then, as you can see here on the back, we have the wires. We need to drill 3 holes. We need to drill the 2 for mounting, and then 1 for the wires to pass through. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the gasket to mark where we need to drill our holes. I'm just going to mark it. Just mark the very middle. Alright, so our holes are marked, so we're going to drill here, here, and here. The outer 2 being the mounting holes. We're going to drill all of them at 1/8 of an inch to start with. The middle one's going to need to go larger, but we're going to drill the pilot hole at 1/8 of an inch. Alright, so now we're going to drill out this middle hole here where the wires are going to pass through to 1/4 of an inch. So when it comes to wiring these lights up, there's a lot of options to go with as far as switches go. You could go the easy route and just use individual switches like this. Those switches you can buy from your local auto parts store, $3 a pop. They're fairly easy to put in. The only disadvantage is that you do have to cut holes here for each switch, and then you have to find a spot to mount them. So this switch box is made by Abrams, and it's actually designed to work with their light bars. But what I've done is I've taken it and removed the insides, and now I have a row of switches here, which I'll light up, as well as 2 momentary switches to change flash patterns with. So if you're going to have potentially several different sets of lights on your vehicle, or you just want to have all your switches in one spot, this is a great way to go. It's a nice, neat little package. The switches are already lined up. You don't have to cut any holes for switches. If you want to add more, you just wire up other switches that are not yet used. You don't have to cut any more holes. So to wire them up to here, first we need to run the wire. If you're using the wire that comes pre-bundled like this, like I am, that'll make your life a lot easier. You can run the individual wires, but that takes a lot more cable management. It's going to be a lot messier. It's going to take a lot more work. This here is definitely what I would go with. I've done it both ways. This is by far superior. So there's a lot of different ways to get the wires from outside to inside, and it's really going to vary depending on what vehicle you have. But a couple things you can look for is on the firewall in the engine bay, there's going to be a couple pass-throughs for other wires and cables for your vehicle. You could use one of those. You could put one in the firewall. That requires drilling through it, and that's quite a bit of an effort. Not really worth it in my opinion. So what I've done here is I've actually gone through the door here. So this is where all the wires from the door pass through into the cab. And what I've done is I've just poked an extra little hole, as small of a hole as possible, because if you open it up too big, then the weather and insects can get in through there, so you want to avoid that. So I poked the smallest hole possible through here, and then now I can just run my wires through that hole, pass through this channel here. It's hidden. The only time you're ever going to see it is when the door is open. And of course, before we do any electrical work, we want to make sure that we disconnect the battery. And then once it's disconnected, we'll go ahead and wait a couple minutes to make sure the system fully discharges, and then we can go and get to work. Alright, so we have everything exposed here, so we know we're going to run into this box here. Then go behind, through here, out the door, up through the front fender. And then we're going to just follow these wires right here, all the way to the front. They'll come out right here. So we can go ahead and run those wires. Now before you go cut the wire, make sure it is long enough. It's a lot easier to cut excess off than it is to solder new wire, extra wire on. So we'll go and cut it at a point where we know we'll have plenty. Now we can go ahead and start soldering the wires up. Alright, so after you have all the wires stripped, then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we tin the wires. Make sure we hit all 4 wires on both sides. Now before we solder the wires together, it is important to make sure that you remember to put the heat shrink tubing. I always put it on the light side just because these wires are longer and will keep the tubing away from the heat of the solder joint. Alright, so we have the heat shrink tubing on all of our wires, and we have all the wires tinned, so we can go ahead and solder the joints together. If you're using this same wire here, then it's going to be green to blue. Then we'll do white to yellow. Then of course we're going to do black to black and red to red. And that is what it should look like once you're done. Now we can go ahead and put the heat shrink on here. Alright, so a quick overview of how these work. We have a momentary switch right here. That is connected up to blue wires on the lights, which with this wire here, the green wire is to the blue wires, the black is to the black, the red is to the red, and the white goes to the yellow. We have the blue wires connected up to a momentary switch, which is then grounded right here. Goes to the common ground, and which is then grounded to the vehicle itself. So that's your pattern select switch. So this here's the setup that I used for the review that I did for the lights, and I had each kind of light, the T3 and the Edge 3, I had them wired up to separate switch, so I could turn them on independent of each other if I needed to. So we have the positive wire goes to the switch that you want to turn that light on. Whichever switch that is, you can have multiple lights going to the same switch. So for example, I could have as many lights as I wanted connected to this switch, so that then whenever I turned this switch on, all those lights would come on. So if you have, let's say, 4 different lights, 2 of them are the same pattern, 2 of them are a different pattern, you can have the positive wire from all 4 of those lights, even though they're different patterns, connected to the same switch. So when I flip that switch, all 4 of those lights come on. Or you can have them set up separate, however you want to do that, however you want to divide it up. And then of course, these switches, since they are lighted, we have our positive 12 voltage, which goes in through our main switch. 12 volt goes through there and then comes out to each of the individual zones or section lights switches. We basically have it set up so that the red wire is connected to a positive voltage. Now that does need to be fused. It needs to have at least a 2 amp fuse on it per light, so I would increase that to a 20 amp fuse if say you have 10 lights put together. Have the black wire is grounded, it's negative. Have the blue wire is going to be your pattern select wire, which means that gets connected to your momentary switch right here. And then the yellow wire is the synchronized wire, so if you have 2 light heads that you want to have synced up, connect the 2 yellow wires together and then they will sync. Alright, so we're going to start soldering the wires that we ran from where the lights are going to be installed. We ran these 2 wires, now we're going to go ahead and solder them up to our switches. That means we're going to be soldering inside the vehicle. I'm going to have this nice thick metal plate down on the carpet between my soldering iron and my carpet so it doesn't accidentally catch on fire. And another thing important to think about is before you solder these together, I'm going to have to run them through some holes in the back of this plastic and also in the back of the switch box. Make sure you don't solder the wires together before you have it run through those holes, or you're going to have to unsolder and do double work. Alright, so I have the ground and the positive wires all soldered up for these 2 new lights. I've not soldered together any of the sync wires or any of the flash pattern wires. Those are just with a wire nut. That way I can go through and change patterns for the lights individually before everything gets finalized. Alright, so now I've got both of them wired up. We're going to go and reconnect the battery and test it to make sure it works. Alright, so we are successful. Both of them work, so we can go and put everything back together. Alright, so all that's left now, we've got all the lights installed, is we just need to get these cables taken care of. We're going to use this flex tubing right here to help us do that. Alright, so it's the next day now. It got a little too dark last night, and as you can see, we've got all our wires tidied up. We've got everything in the wire looms. It's all tidied up along here, and then goes down through the fender and comes inside here. Runs behind here, and now we are all wired up to our switch box. Alright, so to set these lights up after everything's wired together is fairly simple. All you have to do is disconnect the pattern select wires, and then you can change each light individually to the default pattern that you want. And then if you have two lights that you want to have on the same pattern, just connect up the white sync wires, and then connect all the pattern select wires back together, and then you're good to go. Alright, so that's really all that there is to it. It's not that difficult, it just takes a good bit of time. So make sure you set aside enough time for it, and also make sure that you don't rush it, because if you rush it then you might get wires crossed, and that's not fun, because then you got to go back and redo that. Alright, if you guys enjoyed that video, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you share the video, make sure you comment down below, let me know that you liked it. Make sure that you're also subscribed, and while you are subscribing, and if you haven't already done this, go down there next to the subscribed box, there's a little bell icon. Go ahead and hit that icon, that way you can be notified of next time that I release a video. And until next time, this is Nathan, signing off.